My name is Ayana Redbird. I am 98 years old, and for most of my life, I have eaten the same four simple Native American foods every single day.
This is the story of Ayana Redbird, 98 years old, alive, present, whole. This is not a story about longevity tricks. It's not a list of miracle secrets. It's about a woman who has lived nearly a century the same way her grandmother lived, and who carries in her hands her body and her memory. The quiet proof that some old things work because they are true, not because they are trending. The doctor who visited her last winter left the appointment without words. Stable blood pressure. Sharp memory. Bones that didn't match the age written on her chart. He asked what she ate. She answered simply. He wrote everything down, tilted his head, and left without the explanation he was looking for, because the explanation doesn't fit in any notebook. She eats 4 simple foods every single day for nearly a century, and the first one grows right behind her house. Behind Ayana's house, there is a piece of land that doesn't appear on any map. It isn't large, it isn't decorative. It's dark, damp, and smells like root after rain. She has planted there every year since she was young, the same way her grandmother planted, the same way her grandmother's grandmother planted before that. A gesture so repeated, it is no longer a habit. It is living inheritance. The corn that grows there has a color most people have never seen on a market shelf. Blue, deep violet, like the sky in that short window between night and dawn. Ayana never wears gloves when she plants. My grandmother said the earth needs to feel where you come from. If you arrive with too much protection, it won't recognize you. There was a year, she must have been around 6 years old, when the drought lasted so long that the adults stopped talking about rain. When people stop speaking about something, it means hope became too heavy to carry out loud. That year, the stored corn was what kept the family standing. Dry, simple, nothing more than what it had always been. Her grandmother cooked and told stories at the same time, not because they were separable. For her, feeding the body and feeding the memory were the same act. "This corn existed before me," she would say, stirring the pot without hurry. "And it will exist after you. We own nothing, we are only passage." Ayana is 98 years old and still hears that voice with a clarity that sometimes startles her, not as a distant memory, as a presence. Now, let's move to the second food. On the second shelf of her kitchen sits an old metal tin, and inside it are small dark beans, a variety that has no name in English. The name it does have sounds like wet earth after rain, and perhaps that is exactly what it means, in a language that never separated food from the landscape that grew it. Ayana cooks these beans in a way that demands something the modern world lost before it noticed it was losing it. Presence. Not technique. Presence. Being there beside the fire without hurry, without a screen, without anything else on the mind. With herbs gathered from her own yard, bitter roots, leaves that grow on the north side of stones, stalks that dry in the August sun and hold that month's warmth inside them for months afterward. Her grandmother had a phrase about the bean that Ayana repeated to herself in every hard moment of her life. The bean doesn't rise before it roots. Learn from the bean. And Ayana learned. She learned when she buried her husband, when her children left for cities that grew farther and farther away, when she woke on October nights with that cold that isn't in the air. It's inside. She would get up, light the fire, put the beans on. There was something in the act of cooking that returned the ground beneath her feet. The doctors who followed her over the years always came back to the same question, mildly frustrated by the simple answer she gave them. Inflammation that wasn't where it should be. Bone fragility that seemed decades delayed. A mind working with a sharpness that would embarrass people far younger. They took notes, tilted their heads, left without the conclusion they were searching for, because the bean alone explains nothing. The bean inside an entire life of intention, planted with care, harvested with gratitude, cooked with patience, eaten with presence, that explains everything. And it doesn't fit inside any clinical study. Now, let's move to the third food. This one is not easy to describe to someone who didn't grow up on that land. It is not soup. It is not broth, the way modern restaurants use that word. Carefully portioned, elegantly named, written in small fonts on laminated menus. It is something older than all of that. It is made from bones, buffalo bones, when possible. There is a man in the community, a distant relative, who still raises buffalo and leaves Ayana the bones from what he processes. Because that is what one does. Because that is the kind of relationship that has sustained communities for thousands of years, quietly, without ceremony, without contract. Just the understanding that what you have, you share with those who need it. She places the bones in a large clay pot with enough water to cover everything, a few herbs, a root whose name she learned before she learned to read, and then she waits, hours, sometimes the entire day. Low fire, steam rising slowly, a smell that fills the house like a familiar and welcome visitor. Her grandmother used to say that when you make this broth, you are not cooking food, you are cooking time. She said she was cooking the past to feed the future. I was 8 years old and didn't understand. Today I am 98 and I finally do. There is a form of resistance that uses no words, that makes no speeches, that simply continues doing every single day what was always done. The broth in the pot says everything Ayana never needed to say out loud. Now, let's move to the fourth and last food. The herbs are gathered by Ayana herself, most of them from the garden beside the corn and the beans, or from the wild shrubs she has known since childhood, plants whose names she learned before she learned to count. There is a specific way of harvesting she has never abandoned. You don't yank. You don't take more than necessary. And there is always a moment, brief, silent, when the hand rests on the plant before taking anything. Not a formal prayer, something older, a recognition, a quiet request. The tea carries a gentle bitterness that was the first flavor Ayana learned to love. Most children refuse bitterness. Most modern adults have spent their whole lives avoiding it, sweetening everything, asking the world to be softer than it is. But her grandmother taught her early, don't run from the bitter. Learn to sit with it. It leaves faster when you stop running. Ayana thought about that phrase in every death, every goodbye, every morning after the longest nights. The tea was bitter. She drank it. She waited. And the bitterness, in fact, passed. In the late afternoon, when the light turns gold, she sits on the porch with the cup in both hands and simply looks at the garden, at the horizon, at the birds crossing the sky with an urgency she finds gently amusing. At nothing, the nothing that is not empty, but full of something that has no name, that existed before words and will exist long after them. Young visitors sometimes grow uncomfortable in her silence. They try to fill it. She listens genuinely, but she notices the anxiety underneath, as if silence were a question demanding an immediate answer. She says nothing about it. She simply offers more tea. When the sun begins to lower, Ayana does one last thing she has done every day for as long as she can remember. She goes outside. She walks to the small space between the house and the garden and stands facing west, watching the light change color. She stood in this same spot when she was 5, when she was 20, when she buried her husband and came home needing ground under her feet and sky above her head and nothing else. What lives inside this woman of 98, standing in her yard with her hands gently open at her sides, is something no medical instrument has ever fully measured. It is not in the blood work, not in the pressure readings, not in the cognitive charts. It only exists when all 4 of those foods work together across decades, when corn is inseparable from the soil that grew it, when routine is inseparable from the meaning behind it, when the body is inseparable from the land on which it was raised. Ayana opens her eyes. The sky is burning, deep oranges, impossible pinks, that violet that appears only in the last minutes before dark and lasts so briefly that anyone not paying attention will never see it. She is paying attention. She always has been. Perhaps the secret was never about living longer. Perhaps it was simply about living so completely that the body had no reason to give up.